Reverse interest investment. Now, when we're dealing with mass modeling of economies and understanding certain areas, reverse interest investment is an important understanding. This basically means that if you compare the baseline understanding developed by our forefathers, when you have people building a home, somebody builds a home, today standard would be a $300,000 home costs $210,000 wholesale. That's the raw formula. But the government can print upwards of 70% of the value of a new hard asset that's been created. So this deals with the understanding that the government can print, usually they might print different increments. It's kind of confusing. And I'll explain the 30 cents on the dollar to many people, which is 90 grand. But they can print the full 70% of the retail value, which works out to 210. So, which is originally how our forefathers always wanted to put it, and they wanted to do 140. And we'll talk about extended percentages later of how that was done in history and how it worked very, very well. And, I'll explain that. I've actually already explained it in some other items before, but we're going to go ahead and explain it another time. So we're tracking back here. Basically, the government prints $210,000, which is the wholesale cost of the house, which means they took 100% equal value of the wholesale cost of a new hard asset. So you gotta put this into perspective and put it up on a chalkboard to show these percentages and how these cuts are coming down, because you're going to have to rate the responsibility factors, the efficiency factors, and basically competency comes onto the table. Whether or not certain people are competent to assist in certain business factors. It's very important. So on top of this, you can say that somebody also borrowed that money to do the construction. So they borrowed $210,000. So this means the government also has a policy that says all the interest charged, we have to also match that, because that's a form of printing currency. So it's a 100% match on all interest. This way you have to have this, otherwise the banks end up with all the cash and there is no currency. Has to be this way. So there has to be this input creationism. Now, dispersal, that's another story. That's what we're going to talk about, is dispersal and competency and ownership. So on dispersal. So tracking back a little bit. So basically, if you do a 30-year loan for the $210,000 for the money that you source to build your own home, the government has printed $210,000 against, because of the asset. They've already taken that for themselves and invented it. It says, that's our new crypto, that's currency. Boom. So now on top of this, on the interest, they're saying, oh, well, this is happening again. We're taking this again. So now they're printing another $210,000 because the loan payout for you ends up being double. You end up paying double. That's the interest factor of the compounding of interest over 30 years. Is now it's ended up paying double or more than double. So now all of a sudden it's like, well, wait a minute. You borrowed the money, and it's your labor that built this asset, and you're the one that's going to have to make the payments on this, right? And over here we got these people on board for a free ride. These people aren't putting any sweat. They're not showing up to build this house. So they're printing $420,000 over the course of 30 years concerning your house that cost you $210,000. So they're making double. They're making double on the creation. Now, keep in mind you have additional updating. There's a series of complexities of new hard asset revaluation. There's reassessments that come in there. Over the course of 30 years, there's reassessments as to windfall fair market values. And then there's additional printing that occurs with the government as well. So now, as to the ownership on that, I have an entire proposal set of why the government doesn't have the right to own all that currency. Because they're grossly irresponsible. They keep going further and further in debt when they've been handed this vast sum of money allowance, and they're cheating people. They're cheating people. And then on top of that, they say, we're short of money. We have to invent taxes. We have to invent taxes to tax you people because we've blown all the money. It's almost like the government's the ultimate drug addict. These people just can't manage money. So obviously there's these series of serious problems, and there's a lot of avenues for how to continue basically running the models properly. There's all of these updates. And first of all, we have to deal with things like, well, these people are incompetent. They're so incompetent that you borrow $210,000 and they're going to print $420,000 for themselves to spend. Think of the madness of this equation. Then they're going to turn around and come back and say, we ran out of money, we need to tax you. This is who they are. This is our government. So this is very important. We're not talking about you started with solid money, which you could have started with solid money. In other words, you're saying, hey, you want to borrow money. It's even worse because since they don't spend the money wisely, they spend the money non-wisely, they can negatively affect the greed factors of economics, which means they can cause prices to unfairly rise. Why? Because they're incompetent. They didn't do their jobs properly. Let me say that again. They did not do their jobs properly to protect the people. Now, I'm not going to put, someone says, well, doesn't part of this blame on the greed factor belong to people who are evil and greedy? Yada, yada, yada. Okay, I'm not going to say no. I'm going to say that's another series of examinations and splitting hairs and all kinds of stuff. But I'm trying to track the logic of this, of the mass, basically, incompetence that we have concerning our leadership in government. And, you have to expose about it. Otherwise, people can't make hard decisions. We need to know this to make proper forward-moving financial decisions. So now, we get to the point of starting out with the baseline statement of what I want to talk about. So, we've laid out in quick review how things actually work, the reality of certain mathematical cogs that are simply that way. That's how it has to work. But it doesn't have to work that way because it's mismanaged. We need to repair it, obviously. We need to repair that. But let's say for a moment that they weren't mismanaging. So somehow, you could occur and say, let's do some logical investment and logical stimulation and, solid, sound, legitimate, non-inflative hard assets and stimulation theories and items. That would be nice. Maybe that can happen. Do I know how to do that? Of course I know how to do that. So I'm working with all this mass modeling. So now we have something. If you have a fair head, there are people that are going to say, well, you need to stimulate business. So we do know that the government from time to time has put money into key areas to stimulate them. This has happened repeatedly. They've stimulated areas with government money that's actually your money. See, that's the other thing. Again, you're a member of the new created East Indies style company, which is our republic. But you've been cheated. You were supposed to be issued stock and you're supposed to get residuals. But none of this is managed properly. We just have to take the bull by the horns and just totally get control again. Matter of fact, you can't trust the bull to run around all by itself. You have to get on top of this sucker. You have to mount this sucker, and you're gonna have to train this sucker down to be able to take some commands. And you have to have a good jockey. You got to have a good rider. If you don't have a good rider with a good head, he's not going to operate the steer very well. So these are things we have to do. We need to take care of this. So in the beginning statement, we're now talking about one of the specialized features that is actually a norm. So with mass modeling, we have these specialized features, and the statement actually is already correct. It already occurs. The government invests in using government money or loaning government money so a new factory can be built. So there's jobs created. Or that technology is going to be researched and furthered. Or there's a long list of ways where a stimulus item can occur and or has occurred. So here's the thing. Now, if we're talking about the logic of saying, wait a minute, how about we offer a deal to people and say, look, we want you to produce more assets. And they, straight out, oh, you want me to put in overtime to create more assets so that you can print vast amounts of money based upon things. Says, yes, we want to do stimulus. We'll loan you money. Direct. And what are we going to do? So, we'll loan you money at a reverse interest consideration. And this is a major deal here, a reversed interest consideration. So if the loan, if you're not paying interest, then in theory, the government does not, this is very important, by the way, then the government does not print money based upon insurance invented, which means you just stopped 50% of a situation involving interest being created, which is the printing of currency, and then the balance to the answer to that factor, which is the government has to print currency. It's you can't eliminate them. You have to do it, or the balance to facilitate trade of the existence of currency versus product, it won't work. It won't work. You can't have trade facilitated unless you do it this way. However, it's not necessary to print this extra money if you have a declared reverse situation, which is we're going to loan you money at reverse interest. So you're going, okay, wait a minute, is this printing currency? Wait a minute, how does that work? You're going to pay back 5% less than you borrowed, and there's no interest. How does this work? It sounds crazy, doesn't it? Where's the profit? Let me explain the profit. The government's the one doing this, but you're the one doing the labor. You're the one that's agreed to say, hey, I'm going to go into overdrive. This is, what's in it for me if you want me to work extra overtime because you've invented something. This is a government argument. The government's invented the argument to say that the offer is this way because why? We want to print money against the new hard asset that you're going to create. Because if we loan you this money and you're going to pay back 5% less, then the amount, this is a reverse interest. This is a reverse interest prospect, except there's huge, massive profits to be made because the deal didn't exist before. You're bringing into existence a build project, a hard asset being created. So, same formula again. You build a $300,000 house, the government says, well, we can print $200,000, $210,000, but we loan the person $210,000. So what's 5% of that? 210. Oh, let's just, round it around little expenses. Okay, we're going to make 20 grand less. But are you making 20 grand? It's not a make. Keep in mind, it's not a make. It's a take. They're going to take. It's not a make, it's a take. It's very important to understand how this works. If it's a balance item, then it's a balance item except for one thing, that you have to print the balance item. But they're not necessarily being fair with the print up. In other words, they're not handing people the back toe of the trade facilitation bonus, which is supposed to be there to begin with. There's supposed to be a trade facilitation bonus. That goes into the residual aspects. That's why people, another long list of items of why people are supposed to be getting residuals. We're talking about physical, mathematical numbers that are real. And the management of those physical, mathematical numbers are real. It's happening. It happened. It happens. It's going to happen. So the prospect here, reviewing here in simplistic, is that in order to encourage somebody to do an extra project and work overtime, you're offering them a special deal. 5% less back and no interest. Which means this is a solid currency reinforcement logic. This is a solid currency reinforcement logic argument. But it also encompasses the understanding that the government wasn't going to be able to print the $110,000. But it's going to cost the government on this proposal with the 5% back, little handling, extra costs, this, that. We'll call it 20 grand less. So the government's going to be able to print $190,000 that did not exist. And that asset was not going to exist. So the asset's brought into play, and now the government gets to print 210, but there's other costs hidden. You actually still do print the 210. But the balance sheet versus the outlay is obviously has the 5% plus expenses. However you work that, we'll say that it's horribly managed and that's 20%, but it can be less. It could end up all becoming blockchain, virtually automatic, and there's almost virtually zero handling cost. So the prospect is that investment to keep people working and to offer people a bonus situation, a 5% negative factor loan. There's no interest. It's simple. It's divided, and you only pay back 95% of the 100. But the government makes the government still is going to end up harvesting $190,000 to the positive. Keep in mind, you're paying back 95%. They're getting that. And then they're getting an extra 190 because of the print factor. This also makes jobs, creates hard assets, stimulates the economy, stimulates trade. It's also a very positive management aspect because you've got a new structure now. Instead of doing normal loan structure, which requires all this extra printing, which ends up having all these extra entities getting a hold of currencies for various reasons, we address the reality that blockchain eliminates various labor factors, which means you don't need the banker anymore. Not like you needed them before. No, you've got a special loan processor. And this is something that all becomes converted to blockchain, which means you're eliminating virtually all human factors. You're going to have an oversighter, but the oversighter's time on reviewing the entire project multiple times, you're talking about he's going to review whether or not the program that he's using to review the blockchain is correct. He's going to look at the actual blockchain document area. We're talking less than 5 minutes, to inspect all of that, because it's the same formalization. You don't have to read the total number of pages because all the disclosure pages are the same. We know it's the same. It's a standard, and we've checked it with these calculative computer actions. It's the same, so you only need to verify certain aspects involving who's who, what's what, where is it located, is it actually real? It's not a scam. Okay, it's real. Boom. So the amount of labor is not that $65,000 worth of administrative labor that's in banking as we've known it in the past, which has already changed, technically. The labor is now less. Whether you're getting charged less, it's up in the air. So understanding how you have a better solid logic here means that instead of one person working doing labor and two other people, faction or entities, basically taking a big, huge, massive free ride that end up harvesting a related ratio of 75% versus the total new growth understanding to your only harvest of 25%. These are important percentages and important ways to look at this. So the solidity of this style of mass modeling and then implementation is both very lucrative, both very forwarding, and both forwarding as in being steps further towards fairness. Because then if we reevaluate the factor, since we're doing this, the no interest loan factor, you're now eliminating a 95% of the second entity, because you have government of the entity, banker as entity, and you as owner builder as main entity. So you're eliminating 95% of the banker factor because you're now doing a wholesale loan direct. It's going to all end up being blockchain. You're going to end up basically completely eliminating, and there's a slight governmental processing factor that is understanding the banking that ends up being condensed labor-wise. A lot more wisdom. So now we have a realized appreciative economic factor of asset creation and trade facilitation activity that ends up basically actually really having two partners, which means that you're a 50% yielder in theory now to the overall prospect instead of a 25% yielder. Again, very important to understand how these various factors work, why these are items of incredible logic. So that explains that factor for y'all today on mass modeling. Michael Crosby. Now, an added item here is understanding reverse interest investment in relationship to the solidity of currency, the stabilization of currency. And there's a lot of people who will like the physics of this because basically they're going to look at this and say, wait a minute, your factor deals with a harvest factor of the total reality that actually only has the person doing the work that is realizing the original origin asset as a 25%er. And they're still stuck with all these extra costs on top of everything else with interest. It doesn't sound very fair. It's not a very competence thing. So if you only divide it by the entities, then you're looking at the owner builder, the government, and the banker. The government, the Fed is absorbed into the government factor because they actually are. Even though they're a nonprofit subsection, they're as though the same. They're a mated item that's non-separable, actually. So if you look at it as three entities, you change the ratio factor in realization and control, and you eliminate you're basically eliminating the banker. You're eliminating a frivolous service related feature that doesn't make any hard assets. It's dead weight. You're getting rid of all this dead weight. So this is like making the solidity understanding of currency, 30% better. 30% better, because that way you're totally putting a completely new form of confidence into the understanding that you've eliminated this non-productive service factor. Waste gone. So now you have, because it doesn't build assets, it's just a wasteful thing. So it's gone. So the confidence now for many of your investors that understand how to have faith in stabilization on currency, this factor should bring forward incredibly happy, encouraging thoughts, because there's nothing like coming up with something and you look at it, and when you analyze it and the end result is you're eliminating all the fat. I mean, you just took this, boom, a third of this fat, just one entity is basically virtually eliminated. They're the 95%er, and you absorb the 5% into new forms of efficiency, which are occurring anyhow, into the governmental end. There's a way to do that. But it doesn't necessarily exclusively have to happen from the governmental end. The origin of the contract relationship is probably going to end up being more of a generalization shared thing. I mean, that's what happens with a lot of contract inventions on blockchains. And then they just get accepted. So it's actually not necessarily even governmental at that rate. So these contracts will get invented in very creative ways. It'll be very, very interesting. So this is a forward-moving stabilization of currency, and it should be embraced very well.